Welcome back to the shop, guys. Today in this video I will be servicing the rear shock on this YZ. Now this will work on any YZ125 252 stroke, 250F and 450 from the year 2006 up to the current. It's pretty much all the same stuff except a few minor things which I'll cover as we go along. Now this is just a servicing, so I'm not going to get all crazy and start pulling the pistons apart and shims and everything like that. I'm not trying to impress you. I'm trying to show you how I service the shock. This bike has been tuned in very well. Sag's perfectly set, so I don't want to have to reset the sag when I'm done. So to ensure that I put this spring in the exact preload that it is right now when I go to put it back on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to count the threads right here, count how many threads there are. I also have a mark on this spinner right here and a mark tapped in right here, and all I have to do is just reline the marks when I'm done with the same amount of threads, and it will be the same. I don't have to reset the sag. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, and 27. So I'll write that down. 27. There we go. Now I can go ahead and loosen it up and take the spring off. These can be pretty tight. I'm going to start with a punch and just a hammer to get it loose. There we go. Got the top one loose. That's just a locking ring. You want to get that loose first and get that all the way up. There, now that I have that locking ring all the way up, I'm just going to use this tool right here. I mean, you can continue to use a punch on this if you don't have this tool, but if you have this tool, it can make it, you know, a little bit of a cleaner job. Sometimes if they're kind of loose, you can just bend the spring and it spins the whole thing. There we go. Like I said, this is a perfectly good suspension, front and rear. There's no leaks. The bumper's in good shape. So all this is a servicing. Not looking to make any repairs, and we're definitely not looking to open up a can of worms. So we're not looking to dig any deeper than we have to. We're just looking to get the old fluid out, new fluid in, some new fork seals and bushings, and a nitrogen recharge. Appears I have the spring up loose enough, so let's see. Now I gotta slide the bumper up and off. There we go. I gotta get it out of there and get it slid up the shaft. Sometimes that can be kind of a pain in the butt to do. Getting it. What I like to do is just slide this bottom piece up and then back down, and oftentimes the bumper won't come back down with it, or not as much as it did there. Let me try one more time. Let me hold it here as I slide that down. There we go. I got it off. Then the bumper, sometimes it's a little bit hard to press it through this ring. There it is. You just slide the bumper up the shaft. And then on this ring, there's a ring in the middle here, right here. We gotta lift that up and slide this out. Slide this off. And then we slide the spring off. There we go. Now I want to turn the rebound clicker all the way out, but before I do that, I want to count how many clicks it's set to by turning it in and counting. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There it is, 8. So it's at 8 clicks. Now let me turn it all the way out. That'll make it easier for when it's time to bleed the shock. Alright, and I'll write the rebound at 8. Alright. I'm going to go ahead and drain the nitrogen pressure out of it, or release the nitrogen pressure. Press the shock. Release the last little bit. There we go. I'm going to pop this bottom cover off. There we go. Now on the YZ250F and the 450, starting in 2018 for the YZ450, and I believe 19 for the 250F, you need this to release and to add pressure. They have they don't have a Schrader valve on it. You have to use a needle. You can buy these on eBay. Rocky Mountain, Motion Pro sells them, makes them, I believe. I know Race Tech does, but it's a needle. You want to use a fresh needle. When they get dull, they have a tendency to push that rubber piece in. So make sure its best results are with a new needle. I find you can reuse a needle maybe 2 times. And another little trick too, if that's the bike you're working on, is if you push the needle in while there's nitrogen pressure in here. I've never had it push that rubber piece in when there's nitrogen pressure in here. It only happens when you go to fill the shock back up. You go to push the needle back in and it pushes in, then you got to take the bladder back off and reposition it and everything like that. It's a pain in the butt. I find that if you push this in while it's got nitrogen pressure, release the pressure, but leave the needle in for the whole job. And then at the end, fill it back up and then pull it out. Since I've been doing it that way, I have not had any issues. But again, if you just start with a brand new fresh needle, you're good. But that is really about the only difference that we're going to find between the 2 shocks from 06 all the way up to 2023 is really the newer 450s and 250Fs take a needle instead of using a Schrader valve. That is really the only difference. You see on this one right here, I marked it. I got 2 marks here, meaning I've used it twice, which means this one's pretty much done. And that's why I have more. I think I picked this one up on eBay for like 12 bucks. But we won't need that for this job because it does have a Schrader valve. So we're good there. Next step is going to be, now this is where I do it differently than most people. Most people will remove the seal from the bottom here and the seal assembly and pull the whole shock apart, flush the fluid out and put it back together, and then fill it up with fluid from here and with the reservoir and bleed it and all that kind of stuff. I don't like to do that. I do it from up here to top right. I think I'm the only person I've seen do it that way, but I've been doing it that way for years. It comes out great. And the best part is, I find that when you do it from the bottom here, there's always just by the design of this seal assembly, you're always going to have a little bit of trapped air underneath the seal assembly. It's just how it goes. But I find that when I do it from up here, I get 0 air in it, and it's like fully bled, and the performance is good. So that's another reason why I do. Like I said, this bike's already performing good. We got it all dialed in, so I'm looking just to freshen it up without actually having any changes in the suspension, so we don't have to redial anything. We can put it right back on the track, and it's going to feel just like yesterday. The only difference is it's going to feel fresh. For this part of the job, I set this thing on this little tray right here because it's going to leak out a little bit of oil when I first remove that cap, and I just want to catch that. I also, as long as you're careful, you don't have to mark the high speed adjustment or the low speed adjustment here, because that typically stays put as long as you're careful and you don't bump with your hand. But just to be safe, I'll take a Sharpie here and I'll mark them just so I know if they moved while I did this, and I can go ahead and put it back. I do have all these settings recorded. Now this does take a special tool, this double D, and you can pick these up on eBay, Rocky Mountain, anywhere. And if you are looking to purchase this tool, I'll measure it for you so you know what size you need. This looks like it's going to be the 24 millimeter. It's reading 23.8, so that's a 24 millimeter one. However, if you don't have this tool, what I've done in a pinch is I've taken a wrench and I cut a slit on it like that, and that allows you to get under it like that and pull it off. But since I have the tool, I won't be using that wrench today. Oh, and by the way, that wrench is a 15/16. It was just a crappy wrench I had laying around, and it fit and it worked. But since I have the correct tool, we'll be using that. These can be a little tough. There we go. Now you want to press down as you're loosening this up. Again, you hear that pressure is coming out of there, so you want to kind of hold it down as you're loosening this up, because otherwise the pressure can shoot that off. Remember, we did remove the nitrogen pressure, but there's still pressure in here, because you see that, and you see how them bubbles? That's not air that was in the system. And that pressure is not from the nitrogen pressure. what happens is the fluid oxidizes with age, and when it oxidizes, it releases gases. Now, when there's nitrogen pressure in here, there won't be any gases visible in the fluid, because the nitrogen pressure kind of makes them all just kind of tuck away and hide. Kind of like a Coke bottle. You don't see the bubbles in a Coke bottle, a 2 liter, until you open the lid and you release the pressure. Then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, all these bubbles pop up. Well, that's what we're seeing here. Same thing. It's like a 2 liter Coke bottle. We just removed the lid, so you're going to get some bubbles. And now when you lift this off, there is a little washer right here. Make sure you collect that. A lot of times it will stay stuck in there on that, but just make sure you find that little washer. Well, now it's stuck in there, so there it is. Don't lose that. And then there is a spring, so you want to collect that too. Then we have to get that assembly out. I just use a pair of pliers, grab the end of it here, kind of give it a little wiggle as you pull up, and just keep wiggling it. Take your time. There's a rubber O-ring down at the bottom, and it's got some friction. There we go. Oop, that O-ring came off. Pop that back on there. Alright. There we go. I got that assembly off. Now, when you have this assembly off, oh, look at that little stain. There's no sense in taking it apart. There's another little washer or shim down here. Just leave it together. It's the best way to do it, because there's no sense in really taking it apart. So I'll set that aside. Now I'm going to drain the fluid. Oh, I'm sorry, you didn't get to see that on camera. There you go. All I'm doing is just stroking the shock. All I'm doing is just stroking the shock like this to get the fluid out. Now I'm going to set the shock upside down a little bit, just let the last little bit dribble up to the top. Well, I got the shock upside down draining. I'm going to show you another little thing I do here to help bleeding. Normally, when it's time to bleed it, some air can sit up in this cavity. So what I've done here, you see that little hole? Just between the threads and the rubber seal, if you drill a hole on each side right there, and then on the other side, just 2 holes, small holes. And that's it, just through this wall right here. Don't drill in the blue part, just through the wall. Small hole, focus, right there, between the threads and the rubber seal on both sides, and that will aid when it's time for us to assemble the shock, to bleed it and assemble it. And the fluid that I'm going to be using is the KYB K2C. That's what they come with stock. It's KYB oil. This is what's in them stock. It's a great oil. It's what I use in them. You can pick up that oil on Rocky Mountain, eBay, almost anywhere. Enzo sells it. What I'm going to do is pour a little bit in here right now. I'm not going to fill it up. I'm just pouring some for a flushing. And so I can move the shock all around, shake it around, and mix that fluid around and flush it out. I took one of these butt plug things, and I kind of just snip off pieces of it until I get the size that I need. But you can, I'm sure you can come up with anything. Just something to plug the hole here. Because all I'm going to do is just shake the shock around, mix that fluid all around, stroke it a few times, get it up in the valving. Try to work it up into the reservoir. All I'm trying to do, really, it's a good shock, right? I don't expect there to really be any debris in here. All I'm really doing is just trying to flush out all the old fluid. So now I shook it all around, and now I'm going to dump that fluid back out. And you can see the fluid's coming out nice and clean. Again, that's all I'm doing is I'm just looking to make sure I flush out all the old fluid, and that's why I poured some new fluid in there. Kind of shook it around and just get that out of there. Okay, I have the shock set on the bench here. I have these two mallets here just to kind of balance it up, because I'm going to start filling it up with fluid right here. But when it's on the bench sitting like that, because I have these rings on it, it's at a slight angle like this, so the air bubbles will kind of work their way up. And we're first going to fill we're first going to get the shock body full of fluid, and then we'll worry about the reservoir part in a minute. I filled it up to right about there. Then I'm going to move the shock up until the fluid comes almost up to the top without spilling. You can see I got it right at the top now without spilling. And then pull it back down. You'll hear and you'll see air bubbles, and now the fluid level has lowered. You can see it's lowered, and you can see the air bubbles kind of working their way out. So after they kind of work their way out, I'll put it back up to the same level where I had it. Right about there. You know, about an inch from the top, I guess you can say. And do the same thing. Oh, by the way, why I push this shock in, I also twist the shaft as I'm pushing it in. You always twist as you're pushing. Then I pull. And the reason you do that is because this piston right here, it has a clip holding it from coming out, but it can slide deeper in. You don't want that, because if it does that, it's going to push out of nowhere. It's going to push all the fluid right out you've been working with. Now, there are some bikes I've run into that that they don't want to stay put. Every time you slide it, even with twisting, it still pushes the piston in even though you're twisting. And when that happens, it's kind of a pain in the butt. But what I do then is I just take a flat head. It's good to have a second hand around at that point. I just rest it here and kind of underneath the backside of the seal and kind of hold the piston out as I do the stroking, just to make sure that piston stays put. But that is the main reason also why I turn the rebound clicker all the way out, because if you don't do that, there'll be some hydraulic pressure when you're sliding in and out, and that will push that seal in without a doubt. So you got to make sure you turn that rebound all the way out. But let's get back to bleeding. Then I'll angle it up like this, and you can see there's air bubbles coming up. So yeah, just keep doing this for a while. It can take a while. You add a little more fluid, get it to about an inch from the top, and do it again. Twist the shaft as you're pushing it in until the fluid's almost at the top, and then you yank it down pretty much as hard as you can, as fast as you can. The faster the better. And there it is. Some big old bubbles come out that time. And I'm just going to keep doing that. Sometimes it can take 10 times, sometimes it can take 20. You just keep doing it until no more air bubbles come out. Remember where I mentioned that piston slide up and down? If you don't spin, it actually just slid down on me a little bit right there. Watch, you'll see as I pull it out, you'll see it come back out. Watch this. Did you see it? And then watch, you'll see it go back in if I don't twist. Well, I'll give it a little. There it goes. See it go in? See it come back out, but if I twist, it stays put. That's all I'm doing now. It's just bleeding, letting the air bubbles work their way out. Like I said, this can take a few tries. You get to a point where you don't really have to add much oil in the middle of each time you pump it, because now they're just tiny little bubbles coming out. But you just keep doing that until you see no more bubbles. Okay, I have the shock body bled. The fluid is about an inch from the top, and there's no more bubbles coming out. So now we have to get the reservoir full of fluid. Now, before we start bleeding or filling up the bladder part, now's a good time to go ahead and press the Schrader valve one more time and just relieve any pressure that's in there, so that the bladder can relax to its natural position. Because what happened was, or happens is, when we first release the pressure while there was oil in it, all it did was take the pressure out. But let's say the bladder was in an expanded position or a contracted position, it's going to stay in that position until you hit that button right there while this chamber is open, then it can get to its normal relaxed position. So you want to do that before we start bleeding the reservoir part of it. So what I'm going to do now is fill it all the way up to the top. Place this cap back on there, and then just do like that, and you'll feel the bubbles come up and the oil level will lower. Do it again. It doesn't hurt at this point to also hold the shock at an angle as you do it. Just fill it back up to the top. So all I do is I fill it to the top here, put this cap on, and you'll again, as you angle the shock up like this, you'll hear it and you'll feel the bubbles go. Then hold it at an angle. The best angle to hold it at when you do this is where this is perfectly flat. So hold the shock at an angle where it's perfectly flat. You do this enough times and you will fill that bladder completely up with fluid. And then we'll cap her off. Again, this can take a few times too. It's almost there though, I can tell. I can feel it. There's less bubbles on that one. And the fluid did not go down as far. I think that's pretty much it. One more time for good measure. And that is it. So now I can go ahead and lay her back down. She'll be okay. That's why I have these hammers here too, to keep. Okay, now that we have the shock body fully bled and the reservoir fully bled with the fluid up at the top right here, I'm going to go ahead and slide this assembly back in. Like I said, don't worry about taking this thing apart. There are, like you see right in there, that little shim. There's shims. You don't want to get all this stuff out of order, so don't take it apart like I did. And make sure that seal's in good shape. As you saw, that one popped off when I was pulling it. The O-ring popped off while I was pulling it off, but I put it back in its groove. Seems to be in good shape, so she should be good. So let's go ahead and pop her back in. Alright, the same way I pulled it out, I'm going to put it back in. I'm holding it with a pair of pliers here. I'm going to put it at an angle so that the air has a way to escape the air that's in that little concave part in there. There you go. And the same way I pulled it out is the way I'll put it in. Just kind of wiggle it as you push down. There it is. You'll kind of, that's how they kind of go in sometimes. They spit fluid in your face. Alright. So we got that in. Now we have to get the spring back in. Just set that in there. And then remember, we drilled holes in this right here. And we also have that little washer. I like to just drop the washer in there, and usually it'll stay on its own if there's any oil on it. Now we have the holes, so what I want to do is put this in at an angle too, with one of the holes facing up. And hold on. I also like to hold it up at an angle like this, where this part is perfectly flat. Fill it up to the top with fluid. Let me get you up in here a little bit more. There we go. Holding at an angle as you slide it in, the best that you can at least. There we go. Now we got to go ahead and fill her up with nitrogen. But before I do that, let me go ahead and put this cap back on. There we go. This is my little nitrogen setup right here. That's just a nitrogen tank from a welding supply. You can go there and purchase yourself a good used tank full of nitrogen, or if you have a tank full of nitrogen, that's fine. And then I ordered these from eBay for about $140. It's basically just a regulator system that brings the pressure down to acceptable pressure. I have it currently set at about 200 psi. Well, that gauge is a little wrong. 200 does more like 160, 175, but whatever. You get to know your system. You can adjust the pressure right here. That's the pressure that's in the tank, and this is what's coming out in the line. So I'm going to fill the shock to that, and then I'm going to bleed the shock down to the proper pressure I'm looking to get, which is 150 psi. So if you're looking to purchase one of them, the regulator system there, I searched on eBay for like nitrogen shocks. It was for like automotive cars, like track cars, but that, hey, it does the trick. For entertainment purposes, I'm going to compress this shock before I fill it up with nitrogen. You don't have to, but I'm going to do it just for entertainment purposes. You see how the shock does not extend on its own with no nitrogen pressure in it? As soon as we put nitrogen pressure, it will extend on its own. So let's see here. Sit here, hold it for a little bit, let it get all its pressure. There we go. And now to get the pressure exactly where I want, I'm going to use one of these air shock pumps right here. You can get these on Rocky Mountain, eBay, anywhere. You probably already own one if you have a bike with air shock on it. Turn it on here. All right. Let's see what we got her filled up to. $162. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bleed it down. The manual says on this bike you're supposed to run 147. I typically just put them right at 150 because the pressure starts kind of lowering on its own right away. And a lot of people think the pressure lowers. Alright, 150, right on. Now, once you take this off, you do not want to stick it back on. Oh, 151. There we go. Now, once you take it off, you do not want to put it back on because you always lose 5 psi putting this on. You don't lose any pressure taking it off. By design, they have it set up. But when you put it on, just for it to send that pressure up this hose, you lose about 5 psi. So once you get it set, don't recheck it unless you have a way to fill it back up with nitrogen again. Now, some people don't have a nitrogen tank. You can take it to most of your motorcycle shops, call around, but most of your motorcycle shops will fill your shock up with nitrogen for you. Just let them know what psi you want it set at, and they'll do it for you for a charge. Sometimes it's only 25 bucks, sometimes it's 100. Every shop's a little different. Now I'll take a minute to explain why nitrogen pressure goes down through time. Like, I found this shock before I pulled it apart. I didn't show it in the video, but I checked before I pulled it apart, and I found it at 125 psi. Now, like I said, you lose 5 on just connecting this, so it was at 130 actually. The reason nitrogen pressure goes down is not because nitrogen pressure bleeds out. That's not what's happening. What's happening is, as the shaft goes up and down, a little bit of oil is lost just from keeping this shaft lubed, and little crevices and stuff that's in it. You're going to lose a small amount of oil just keeping the shock lubed and clean. That's just what happens. And as you lose oil in here, the nitrogen bladder in here will expand to take up the space as the oil moves out. It will displace that space. So and as it expands, the pressure will drop down. Just how it goes. So that's really where your nitrogen pressure is going. Some people think, you know, well, if your shock's reading low nitrogen, just, let's say you check it and it's at 100, let's just fill it back up. Well, that's really not the right way to do it. The right way to do it is to service your shock and start from scratch. You know, get fresh fluid in there and start from scratch. And the reason I say that is because if you keep filling this back up with nitrogen, but you never dump this fluid and fill it back up with fresh fluid and start from scratch again, eventually this thing will expand so much that it'll reach the discharge hole down up here, and that's when bladders end up breaking. So it's best if you find yours low on nitrogen pressure just to go ahead and service your shock. All right, let's see. There it is. All right, now I'll go ahead and set the rebound clickers back to 8. You don't want to bottom this out hard, just a nice gentle bottom out. You're basically just bottom out a needle and an orifice, so just bottom it out gently. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There we go, 8. Now you'll notice it rebounds a little bit slower. And it also compresses slower. There it is. That's what a lot of people don't realize about the rebound adjuster. It's actually, in some countries they call it tension, because it actually does both compression and rebound. In America we just call it a rebound, but it will, as you turn it in, you make it stiffer, it will also make it compress slower. It does both ways. Most people don't know that. They think just the compression adjuster does that, but no, that actually controls some compression too. But time to move on. Let's go ahead and get the spring on. For this bike, there is a right way and a wrong way to put the spring on. There's a top and a bottom. I just use this. See the amount of play that's there? It's a little bit tighter on this side, a little bit looser on that side. So that's the top, this is the bottom. And if it's a stock spring, you can usually tell because they put the mark on the bottom that identifies what rate the spring is. Alright, oh, we got to get the bumper back up. Let me go ahead and do that first. There we go. Slide this collar back on there. Oops. There we go. You want to put that on the bottom, put that there, and this goes in the middle of them. Then to hold it in place, what I'll do is slide the bumper back down on top of everything. There we go. That'll hold it in place for me. And now I'll go ahead and tighten down the locking rings. Alright, I have them locked in place. I just did it the same way I took it off, and I counted the lines. I have 27 threaded lines here from here to here, so I got it right back. I won't even have to recheck the sag. I can bolt this thing up and it's gonna feel just as good as it was before. The same setting, same sag, same everything. The only difference is it's gonna feel fresh, like a new bike. On most of these Yamahas, you can spin, I mean all these you can spin, but spin the bottom here, and you want to line the rebound adjuster with the compression adjuster up here on the same side. That's how most of these Yamahas are stock. There we go. But double check your bike. Some bikes it's easier to have it on the other side if you're doing a different model, but on most of these Yamahas you put them on the same side and that's good. Also, now's a good time while you have the shock off to take these bearings, take them apart, clean and grease them. Same with the top one here before you put it back on. If you have a loose bearing, now's the time to go ahead and change them out. Well, that shock is done and ready to go. Gonna go ahead and put her back on the bike, and down in the description will be a link to the forks on rebuilding or servicing the forks and doing the fork seal. So if you're interested in the forks, just go down in the description and there'll be a link to that. As always, I appreciate you guys subscribing and liking. And I really appreciate every single one of you guys that watch these videos. Catch you next time.